Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful lunch, meeting old friends, making new ones, and exchanging ideas. We will now proceed with our first keynote. Our first keynote speaker is Professor Elaine Munthe. She is NIE's fourth Dr. Ruth Wong Professor in Teacher Education. She is Professor and Director of the Knowledge Center for Education, University of Stavanger, Norway. Professor Munthe was first educated as a teacher and taught for some years at international schools and in Norway, before continuing her studies and receiving a PhD in education from the University of Oslo. Her research career started in the mid-80s as a scientific assistant on a reassessment of bullying in schools in Norway. And since then, she has been concerned with classroom studies, studies of teachers' work and professional learning, and questions concerning how we qualify teachers. She has been department chair of a Department of Teacher Education, Dean of Faculty of Arts and Education, and currently director of a research center established and funded by the Ministry of Education and Research, where the main emphasis is on conducting systematic reviews of education and making these accessible for the education sector. So, without further ado, Professor Munthe, please.
Oh, good. Thank you. So hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be a keynote speaker here at this conference on redesigning pedagogies. I'd also like to say congratulations to the organizers for putting this together. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of all of the discussions that you'll be having over the course of the next 3 days. My name is Elaine Munthe, and I'm currently the director of the Knowledge Center for Education, as was said, in Norway. But I'm here today as the fourth recipient of the Dr. Ruth Wong Professorship in Teacher Education. And I'd like to acknowledge that in the beginning of my presentation. And I also want to bring out some of Dr. Ruth Wong's work to build my presentation on, and to show the relevance, and to show how we're still working on the same topics that she brought up so many years ago and was so dedicated to. I am greatly honored and humbled to be the recipient of this award, or this professorship. And as you can see on the slide here, it's named after the late Dr. Ruth Wong, and the aims is to enhance the teacher education experience and expertise within the National Institute of Education and the Singapore Teaching Fraternity, as well as to increase cooperation and activities between NIE, the teaching fraternity in Singapore, and the international education community. And this is a truly noble goal for a professorship like this. And I'd just like to add that for myself personally, I see it as something that will contribute greatly to not just myself, but also the international community. So the community outside Singapore, true benefactors of this. And I see it as my task now to bring the legacy of Dr. Ruth Wong and all of the fantastic work that's going on here at NIE with me back. So I wish to thank Dr. Ruth Wong's family and also NIE for this opportunity. It's a great honor and a true learning experience that I appreciate deeply. Dr. Ruth Wong is known for very many things, and I've learned even more about her during my time here. She was a graduate of Harvard Graduate School of Education, and when they celebrated their 100 years, they created an overlook of 100 influential alumni over the 100 years of existence, and Dr. Ruth Wong was chosen as one of them. And I've taken 3 short paragraphs from a description of her work that will also form a basis of some of my talk today. The first paragraph is about how she gave teachers the tools to think critically and to seek to understand how children learn so that they could teach more effectively. Creating teachers who create knowledge, teachers who are able to study and to learn and to develop based on the studies of their students is something that we're still working on today, trying to find out how we can promote this kind of skills and knowledge and attitudes and mindsets of the learning teacher, where the student that they have is their object of study, and that it's important to keep on studying students and to learn more about them. And this was something that Dr. Ruth Wong presented and was preoccupied with, I think, a long time before very many other people in teacher education were thinking about that. In the second paragraph, we see that she elevated the profession. And I think that, too, is a key issue that I want to talk a little bit more about, and that is teaching as a profession. And in fact, we still meet people today who don't acknowledge teaching always as a profession, but see it more as a craft that you don't need higher knowledge to do and you don't need research to do. It's just something you can go out and do. And we see teacher education programs around the world that are more content-focused and not necessarily focused on the professional theories and the professional research that you need. The third paragraph says that she was a proponent of collaborative learning, and she advocated for research-based assignments to take the place of examinations. And she was also among the first in her country to promote counseling in schools. These are all 3 areas that we're also still working on today. Collaborative learning, what does it mean to work together professionally? And what does it mean for students to learn to collaborate and to learn together when they collaborate? I can still meet teachers who say that, well, we can't do group work in this classroom. It doesn't work. And a lot of it is because the children haven't learned to collaborate and haven't learned how to use the possibilities and the differences in each other to learn from each other. And she was also a very strong advocate of counseling and mentorship. And this is something that we've also worked on. We see, like I was just discussing during lunch here today, the mentorship programs for novice students that come into effect, or novice teachers, that come into effect and that are used around the world now to help teachers transition from student to becoming teacher. This is a legacy that I think NIE has done very well in building on, and we're incredibly fortunate to have someone as visionary to start NIE and to start it as a higher education institution. I also have found a paragraph written by Dr. Ruth Wong, and it was written for a publication, a UNESCO publication. And she wrote about Singapore and innovation in education in Singapore. And this paragraph just spoke to me, really. And it was something that so I just copied the whole paragraph in, and I've highlighted a little bit because what's highlighted there is something that we'll be talking a little bit more about today, too. But she writes that for a country which has as one of its aims the building of a tight-knit, cohesive, and gracious society, The tasks ahead are challenging in that qualitative considerations do not materialize as easily as quantitative plans. And just think about each word. There's so much depth in one sentence. To examine, analyze, and classify goals, aims, and objectives is arduous, and it may take some pains and patience preparing instruments to measure the desired quality of the output, but the task is not impossible. And here's an interesting piece. However, between the goals and the outcomes, the variables are not easy to control or predict. And I think this is something, so this just little quote there is something that will I'll bring with me into the rest of my talk, because practice, which we're talking about today, is fraught with variables that are not easy to control or predict, as all teachers know. But research is also fraught with all of these uncontrollable and uncertainties. So we have two areas, both research and practice, with lots of variables that are difficult to predict and control, even though we try our best at doing it, and it's something that we're all striving for, to find ways of doing it. And we can say that these are the two troubled waters that I'll be talking about, research and practice. And I see them as troubled waters because there's always tensions going on. There's dichotomies that can be fighting and struggling against each other. And for both teachers and researchers, we need to find ways. And this conference is bringing research and practice together. And we're talking about research-practice partnerships. So two troubled waters are being bridged, are being put together, and we have to try to find ways that can be fruitful for both. And that can be challenging and inspiring and difficult. And I think it's also important that we acknowledge the difficulties that also lie in this kind of work. It isn't easy when two different waters meet and can collide too. So based on this little introduction to Dr. Ruth Wong's work, and there is so much more to study and to find out about her work, but based on this brief introduction, in line with Dr. Ruth Wong, I understand that education is complex, and that education is hard work, and that we need tools, we need theories, we need research, we need skills, we need experience to do education well, or well enough. Educational research and innovation is also arduous and hard work. And I think that we also need to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that in times where we have had a lot of pressure on production and producing research, and perhaps in research too, there's been too little time to think the long thoughts and to think over again and to reassess our methods and to reassess the research that we have carried out, and perhaps to take a little step back and to look at, well, what do we have and where are we headed when it comes to research as well. So the hard work of research is also apparent. And as I said, the variables are not easy to control or predict, neither in practice nor in research. And we need to keep reminding ourselves of this too, especially as, for instance, newspaper headlines write about very simple results, that we know that there's so much complexity behind, and we need to be aware of what it is, what situations we're in, and all of the uncertainties behind it, without it disabling us, but enabling us. The uncertainties can be crippling if we think of uncertainties too much. Uncertainty can be something that can stop you from working on because you become so uncertain you don't know what to do. So uncertainty here, in the way that I'll be talking about it, is something that is a source of growth, something that can help you move on if you're aware of it, and that can help you find new ways. If we're too certain about what we do, there's no need for change. And innovation comes along when we ask questions and when we feel that there's something that we need to solve. And when we do research, and as many of us here today have done research for many years, we know that we want our research to matter, no matter how critical we might be of the limitations or of what the results can be used for. Research has to matter for schools, for education. And the question is, how can we make it matter? How does it matter? And in what ways? And another question is, why should research matter? What does research matter for? And not all people would agree that research matters either. There are lots of Facebook groups, and I'm an avid Facebook user, and I see lots of discussions going on where research is questioned, where people are highly critical of what research means to me. Do I need that? I mean, I'm working, I'm doing a great job. I don't have time to look at research. It's just impossible for me to find ways to incorporate or to use the new research that's going on. So it's not anything that has anything to do with me. Research is something that belongs in a university or somewhere else. So I think that, too, is a question that we need to take seriously as researchers, too, how we communicate research and how we make it relevant for others. For myself, as I said, I was a teacher to start with, but I've been in research for so long, and my research and practice has been so integrated that I see it as one. Research and teaching as two sides of the same coin. We teach things that we do research on. And it's been so important throughout my life that it's difficult to see the difference. We heard earlier today from the Minister of Education and others how research has been strengthening educational sector in the north, in Singapore, and how the central NIE has been in that. In my own country, in Norway, we started working from about 2005, targeting teacher education with research funds. But the research funds for teacher education presupposed that there was a partnership with schools. So you wouldn't get funding to do research unless you partnered with schools to do that research. So we've been trying to build the close-knit research practice partnerships for a long time, and yet we see that it isn't easy. There are problems facing research practice partnerships that we also need to work on closely. And it has to do with a lot of things that we'll be talking a little bit more about. But I think that from my own point of view, what I've learned most about when it comes to educational research, I have in fact learned the last 5 years. The last 5 years as the director of the Knowledge Center for Education in Norway has given me the opportunity to do research on research and to take that step back. So what we do is that we monitor research, we assess research, we synthesize research, and we disseminate research syntheses. So as I said, we do research on research. And this has given me an ample opportunity to see how complicated research is. And today, at the touch of a finger, we have access to millions of research papers within seconds. There's so much out there. And I constantly think of my father-in-law, who did his PhD in the late 60s, early 70s, on the first translation of the Bible to the Malagasy language of Madagascar. And in order for him to find the literature, the sources that he needed, he traveled around the world to all kinds of archives. And my mother-in-law was his Xerox machine. So she went with him to Indonesia and all over the place to look in the archives, and he found what he needed, and she would write the transcript of everything. And it's just incredible to think of now, because the vast amount of research that is available is overwhelming. And it's overwhelming for researchers. So how overwhelming must it be for teachers and other practitioners who don't have research as their daily job? And yet we expect them to be abreast with research. So this has really become a question and a topic of great concern, that we need to think of how we can make research more accessible. And we also know that research isn't accessible to everyone because it costs money to access databases and to access journals. And around the world, that is also very unevenly distributed, access to good, high-quality research. So trying to find ways of navigating this whole pool of research and to find ways to consolidate and to synthesize. I was just talking to one professor just now about the dichotomy or the wars of math instruction, direct instruction versus inquiry instruction. We have the reading wars. What kind of reading should we have? There's so many different kinds of aspects and routes into teaching, and the researchers don't agree. So what should a teacher do when the researchers don't even agree about what is the best way to do things? And that's why we need to have these dialogues too, and that's why we also need to not just look at results, but also to look at the methods used to arrive at the results. Just like teachers look at their teaching methods when it comes to arriving at learning results, researchers and others have to look at the methods that we use to arrive at our results. And I think understanding each other's methods is becoming more and more important when we talk about research literacy too. So we need to understand the methods behind so that we can assess what's going on. What I have here on this slide is just a couple of examples. On the right, you have all of the different kinds of reviews that are possible to do, where you sort of try to pool together a whole broad spectrum of research on one topic, and you try to synthesize to find out, well, what do we know today? What do we know that about this research? And you can do it in different ways. And you can do it qualitatively or quantitatively. But these are ways to sort of bring research together and to try to help understand what a research field is all about. On the other side, we have a living gap map. And that's something that we've been working more on, which is to also bring together all the research, but not necessarily to synthesize it, but more to categorize it. And this gap map is, in fact, a gap map of all the funded, in Norway, all the research funding from the Research Council to education results in publications. And this is a gap map showing all of the publications that have come out of research funding since 2010 in Norway. And this map can easily show you that, we have very little research on vocational education. There's a lot of research on this. So you can easily get a picture of where the research is and where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. And then you can also go deeper into it and see. We've just done one on Nordic teacher education and looked at educational research. And teacher education research. What kind of research do we have in the Nordic countries about teacher education? And we've created a gap map so we can see where do we have similarities and differences, which countries are strong on what, and how can we move forward as a Nordic region in doing research on teacher education. So this is something that can also advance research into the future. But this is also something that can enhance the profession. And we're thinking of teacher educators as well as a profession, and the knowledge base that teacher educators need in order to do their job. Dr. Ruth Wong was an advocate for teaching as a profession. And if teaching is a profession, teaching needs a knowledge base. And what is that knowledge base? How is that knowledge base developing? How is NIE contributing to the knowledge base? What research are teachers using here that you can see is influencing the work that they're doing? These are important questions. And this slide just shows some of the work that's been done on teaching as a profession. And you can see in one column some of the theories of professions that have been evident through the years, starting with Durkheim, who looked at professions as delineating sort of a group of actors with specialized knowledge, with ethical standards, and with authority. Another central name when it comes to theory of professions is Max Weber, and also looking at the characteristics of a profession and talking about the autonomy of professions and the ethics of a profession. Talcott Parsons and Robert Merton, central characters, central theoreticians within theory of professions. Andrew Abbott, another one who has done influential work on professional work, professionalization processes, and professional boundaries of professions. And Elliot Friedson is another one. We could go on. There are so many that have done fantastic theoretical work on professions in general, looking at law, looking at medicine, looking at many different professions. But whether or not teaching was a profession has been debated. And I think a lot of the debate is related to the individualization that we've had in teaching up through the years. And in Norway, a lot of weight on experience of teaching and not so much on the knowledge and the research of teaching. But that has changed. The teaching as a profession, we see Ruth Wong, we see Dan Lorty's work, I think has been seminal to our understanding of teaching and teaching uncertainties. He talked about the endemic uncertainties of teaching and showed how knowing whether or not you've done a good job is very difficult when you're a teacher because you might not know until after the students have graduated whether they've succeeded or not. Whereas a pilot knows exactly when he's landed whether the job was good or well done or not. So teaching is very different. Linda Darling-Hammond, who has been here and who has done fantastic work in teaching as a profession, Richard Ingersoll, another, Dr. Ruth Wong recipient, who was here in 2022, or online at least in 2022. And we have Andy Hargreaves and Michael Fullen, who are also doing work on professional capital. These are just names I think that I think are central to the topic and field, and it could have been much bigger. But my main idea with showing this is to show the growth of our understanding of professions as something that requires professional knowledge, professional skills, professional ethics, professional standards, and it's something that also is different. So an engineer has a different profession than a teacher, and understanding what a child does in math and how a child solves math problems is something that a teacher would be able to do, but not necessarily an engineer, because they have different professional knowledge, and that's important that we have that background. And in this professional knowledge, and with this professional knowledge, they do and make their professional judgments. And professional judgment is all about applying knowledge, skills, and experience in a way that is informed by professional standards, knowledge, laws, and ethical principles to develop an opinion or decision about what should be done to best serve clients. And clients, in this case, are pupils. Professional judgment is something we talk about a lot, and it's something that we highlight and that we bring up. How often do we question it? So when do we question professional judgment? Is professional judgment always good? Is professional judgment always right? Is there always high quality in professional judgment? Or should we make a distinction between judgment and professional judgment? Because there's a lot of judgment that happens throughout the day when you're making hundreds of decisions, lots of judgments going on. And when is one of the judgments professional, based on knowledge and skills and experience? And when is judgment based on previous decisions, things that you've done before, without questioning, without thinking whether that was the best way to do things? There are very many who have looked at decisions and teachers' decisions and have shown that teachers make hundreds and hundreds of decisions, often on the spot, right now. Sometimes you're able to think about them and plan, but very often you're not. And what kind of knowledge do we use when we make these decisions and judgments? The role of knowledge and experience in professional judgment, I think, is quite complex as well. And we don't have to just think about teachers here. We can think about researchers as well. So the professional judgments that we make about the research that we're going to carry out is also based on our professional judgments. And how do we make our professional judgments in our research which is our practice? And what makes a teacher's judgment different from anyone else's, or a researcher's judgment different from anyone else's? This is just a diagram, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And I'm going to start by saying that John Dewey, among others, we've often discussed theory and research on one side and practice on the other side. And very often, research and theory is looked at as something that is more generalizable, something that's more certain. We can arrive at principles. We can arrive at results that you can use across situations. Whereas practice is messy. Practice is contextual. Practice is full of more uncertainties. So we see these as more like two different spheres, different bodies that can collide, in fact, very often, because the contextual is often understood as so contextual that how can generalized principles be relevant? And how can something that you do in Singapore be relevant for me in Norway with a totally different system? So we have this idea of practice as complex and uncertain, and theory and research as more generalized. And this is an understanding that has been about for a long time. And we see that practice is something that also comes about from your own experience. So your own experience you gain knowledge from, and also you gain knowledge from other people's experiences. And collaboration with others is one way to really gain access from other people's experience and to get more perspective on your own experience if you collaborate well with other teachers or with other researchers. But when it comes to research and theory, we often have quality assessment. We look at the quality of research, and there are different standards. When it comes to the knowledge that we gain from our own experiences, we don't have the same kind of quality assessment. We don't know what kind of experiences are high quality experiences that we can gain high quality knowledge from, or what kind of knowledge we gain from it at all. So there's something here too that's a little bit different. I can tell you now that there's one worrying thing that I think that's going on in Norway, and that is that we're experiencing a very low recruitment to teacher education. And in order to meet low recruitment, an idea is to lower the bar for access to teacher education so that more people can be admitted to teacher education. And I think that's a bit worrying when we start lowering the bar to teacher education, and also putting a higher emphasis on experience-based knowledge compared to research and theoretical knowledge. So there's something going on that I think we have to look out for, and which definitely I would not think would be in the spirit of Dr. Ruth Wong's legacy. So this is something, too, that I think we'll see going on around the world if we have problems now with recruitment to teacher education. But what is a good decision? What is a good professional decision? What knowledge should I base my decisions on? When you teach normally, why do you teach the way you teach? Why does your teaching look like it does? When you do research, what do your research designs look like? Why do they look like they do? We have a master's degree teacher education in Norway, where students do master theses, and very many do interview studies. And we're questioning, why do they do interview studies? And very often it's because the mentors are used to working that way. And we have to think really critically about what kind of methods we're learning and what kind of methods we're teaching and helping students to learn and to use. So the question of quality, I think, is important, because we do need quality criteria as well for the work that we do. And one of the reasons I'm so, not exactly obsessed, but at least preoccupied with quality, is that the decisions that we make are contingent. So there is contingency in decisions. They could have been different. And we don't always understand risk in education, I think. Many years ago, I did a Google search for risk and education. I had found loads of research on risk in medicine, because of course you have the risk of losing lives. I had found loads of research on risk in finance, because you have the risk of losing money. But in education, when I Googled education and risk, I found loads of research on at-risk students. So it was the students that were the risk. And that just got me thinking about, well, what is risk in education? And if our decisions are contingent, we could have decided something else, we could have done something else, then maybe I should be more aware of at least some of the decisions that I make, because we can't possibly be aware of all of them. But we do need to sit down and to reconsider the quality of the decisions that we make and the knowledge that we base our decisions on in our work. So if we look at theory and practice again, it seems like there might be something about research, that we have theory derived from research, and we have quality assessment and everything like that. Whereas when it comes to, so we can be more certain, we can have more generalizability in that. When it comes to practice, there's more uncertainty, it can be more situated. But I'm not so sure that that is entirely true, because I think, as I've been trying to convey, that there's also a lot of uncertainty in research that we need to look closer at. And that's what I want to do a little bit of now. In my own work, again, when we do systematic reviews, I don't know if you've seen this pyramid of research quality. Very often they put systematic reviews at the top, sort of top above randomized control studies. I don't agree with the pyramid because I think all research has good, high quality, and we need all research for all of the different kinds of questions that we have. But there's this idea that systematic reviews have high quality because they can tell you across studies what it is we know and can sort of synthesize and bring together. We can aggregate knowledge. If you look at the right-hand side, why we do it, we can aggregate, so we can say, well, what do we know why now, and why do we know it, and what do we think is the best approach based on 150 studies or 510 studies? What do we think are the best ways forward? We can do that kind of research using aggregative analyses. But of course, there are lots of questions related to that too. Sometimes there's very bad quality systematic reviews. They don't hold high quality either. So you might have systematic reviews that are comparing apples and pears and coming out with oranges. So you really have to be able to question the methods and the methodology that's behind systematic reviews as well in your work and when you use research. Another approach to doing systematic reviews is the conceptual, where you use more qualitative approaches to theorizing. So you can use qualitative research, qualitative data, and you can synthesize across many different research articles to come up with, okay, so what do students in Singapore really think about democracy? Or what do students in Singapore really think about well-being in schools? You might have 50 studies that have looked at students' perceptions of well-being, and you can synthesize this to find out what do they mean across those studies. And it gives you access to a much larger pool of data, and it can also give you the possibility to reanalyze and to come up with new understandings and new concepts of what it means to be a student in Singapore. So these are ways that you can do research to help create a research foundation or knowledge foundation. But as it says down below there, garbage in, garbage out. If the studies are not well performed, if they're not done well, then of course there's no point in aggregating them either, or of using them to conceptualize, because you might end up with something that isn't relevant or isn't as good. Another type of research which is held in high esteem is the randomized control design, which is described as a gold standard. And of course, this is a way where you can try to control some of these uncontrollable variables. And it's a way that you can try to get more access to what effects a study can have. However, there are quite a few critical voices or critical questions concerning RCT studies as well. Weaknesses are apparent. Strengths and weaknesses. Strength can be, as I said, that you can identify principles, you can identify programs and practices that have some degree of generalizability, and that can give you some way into what you should do. However, there are also weaknesses, because very often they're not replicated. And we see too that when they are replicated, you don't necessarily get the same results always. So the few that are replicated, it's difficult to get the same results. And as we see too here, how Connolly et al. In 2018, they saw that there was a huge increase in the use of RCTs over the course of the years from 1980 and up into 2018. They found 1,017 unique RCTs in education, and 799 of them had been produced in the last 10 years. So it's something that is really growing. And in England, we have the Education Endowment Foundation, which is they've become experts in conducting RCTs and doing RCTs. If you're interested in that, look them up online and you'll find out a lot more there. But the weaknesses, as I said, are that they're very often not reproduced, and it's difficult to base decisions just on one study. But another thing is that very often they do not include the implementation process evaluation, so that you do not know what the context was like, what it was they were actually doing, what kind of situation and context was this in. You know the input-output, but the rest is a black box. And we really need to get at that black box in order to know whether this is relevant and contextualized in a way that's relevant for us. So learning more about the black box of RCTs is important. Often we don't know what the business as usual is. We just get to know that there's a trial and then there's a business as usual, but we don't know what the business as usual was, what they were doing. So there are lots of things that we also need to question and to make sure that we learn more about from that. In more qualitative approaches, we can have deep, rich qualitative data that addresses complexity, that can give wonderful descriptions. Weaknesses can be that it is very contextual, that it's hard to generalize. Often the researchers say that it's not generalizable. They don't discuss generalizability. And it can often be difficult to assess if the researchers are not very transparent about how they have analyzed the work that they have done. And when it comes to value-added research, there's also a lot of discussion going on whether we in fact can compare across schools. And what does it mean that there's value added from one school to another? So this is just to show there's a lot of different discussions going on about research quality too. And if you're really interested, I would suggest that you look at this book here, which is a good book that shows a little bit about an evidence-informed education and a critical discussion of different kinds of approaches to education. What the authors of this book also state, and what many others are also interested in, is that for research to be used, because we want research to be used, it has to be usable. And what does that mean, that it's usable? They say it has to be relevant. And that means that what's relevant for one school might not be relevant for another school. So it has to sort of touch you. It has to be something that you feel a need for, something to work on. It has to be rigorous. We have to trust the results. And this is about the methodology. So it has to have a rigorous methodology. Now that doesn't have to be RCT. That can be high quality, qualitative studies that are transparent, that you can see what's going on. And teachers need to understand what this is and need to be a part of this discussion about what rigorous research is so that they're able to assess whether they can trust the research that's coming. Because that's another thing today, that schools are being bombarded by all kinds of deliverers of all kinds of things, and the schools have to make the decision, what should we choose? So a lot of that is left up to the schools to decide. What do we know about, sorry, I went a little bit too quick there. Cogent, it also has to be cogent, so that findings are supported by principles or concepts that can be used, so that it's easy for teachers also to understand the principles and to use the principles. This is one way of making research more usable. And coherent means that it can be integrated with other concepts and principles. The work that's ongoing, you can see, that fits in here, that fits with what we're doing. So we can use that to make an added improvement and to go a step further. What do we know about research use? This is a topic, too, that's becoming more and more researched. And you can just think for yourselves, those of you who are working in schools here, what kind of research do I use? How is research relevant for the work that I do? How do I use research, or how do we as a school use research? And of course, you're very research active, probably, the ones that are here, interested in research. But it's also a question of upscaling and of getting more schools on board and how we can do that to make it more relevant. This quote I thought was really good. I enjoyed this one. And it's also from that book, but it's a quote by Thomas. And he says that lawyers approach the notion of evidence with more finesse, deliberation, and care than I have ever done. They ponder over standards of proof, reverse burdens of proof, standards within standards, presumptions of fact, persuasive presumptions. They worry about bias, corroboration, privilege and interest, admissibility, cogency, prejudice, relevance. What do we do when we look at the evidence? What evidence do we have? What evidence do I trust? And what is evidence for us in schools and what we use? I think it's an important discussion, and it's an important discussion for researchers and practitioners to have together. So that discussion, I think, is important if we want to develop research literacy and we want to work more in research practice partnerships. We need to understand each other's practices. And it's not enough for researchers to understand teachers' practices. I think we also need to involve teachers in our research practices and to getting a symbiosis of that by still acknowledging each other's different knowledge areas and different expertise, but building that bridge of having discussions and understanding more of each other's work. We have many different policies in place in Norway to try to emphasize and to increase the use of research in schools, but we know very little about whether we're succeeding or not. It's still a black box of what research is being used and how it's being used on the main level. And if we look at this one from PISA, we might say, okay, not so good, I'm not using research all that well. But okay, this is a fairly simple way of describing research use. We know that results in reading can be influenced by other things than reading instruction, and that it's a more complex picture. But still, we might question what kind of reading instruction is going on and how well we're using the research that we know about reading instruction in the countries. And we're questioning, well, what is the value of educational research for the teaching profession, for practice? Where can we see that educational research has an impact and is usable? And is there a disconnect between the two? We've been trying to bridge this over years, and I think we're closer than ever before, but there's still some bricks missing in that bridge to connect the two. And I think redesigning pedagogies for that will be one of the ways forward. The OECD is working on this now. Who cares about using education, research, and policy and practice? My center and many other researchers and centers around the world are involved in this work here. And we're trying to strengthen the use of research in both policy and practice. So can we bridge this? Can we bridge the two waters? Coming to a kind of a conclusion, but with more questions ahead, I think that to get research use involved, we need to have resources to get research into use, and the resources can be lots of different things. They can be guidance reports, they can be systematic reviews, they can be conferences, they can be mentors, they can be very many different kinds of resources. But I think we just need to identify what are the resources we have that really can help stimulate research use when it's relevant, when it's needed. So it's not about pushing research for the sake of pushing research, but for helping to use research in ways that can enhance the education for pupils. So what kind of resources do we have in place? And what kind of infrastructure? I know that there's a wonderful infrastructure in Singapore for teachers, for the teacher development, and also for connecting with NIE over the years and connecting with research. Not all countries have that. So, but think about what kind of infrastructures do we have to enable us to support research use? And also, what kind of expertise do we need at the school level or other places in order to use research? There's some very interesting research coming out from Dr. Farley Ripple and others on research use that looks at research being used in many different ways in schools. There's no one way, but there are many different ways. And finding out more about that is also one of the interesting aspects of doing research on research use. But we're talking about an ecology for research use. My own center is part of the national ecology in Norway, along with many other centers and many other higher education institutions. But we need the ecology to build relationships, to build the supports, and also to promote the expectations. So the expectations that we use the research that comes from NIE in a good way. Furthermore, we need to have knowledge about use and to do research on knowledge use. And we also need to have pedagogies. I think based on this, we can develop pedagogies for use and not just simply implementation. I'm talking about conceptual use, thinking, using research to think, using research to develop capacity, and not just implementing one way of doing things, but being critical and using it in a critical and qualitatively good way. So if we have principles and pedagogies, we need to have theories of use, we need to have practices of use, and principles that can be more generalized and that can influence the use, but that don't necessarily provide just one size fits all. Critical communication and understanding, I think, is the way ahead in order to arrive at this too, where research and practice go together with critical communication and understanding to investigate each other's uncertainties, to investigate each other's methods, to share thoughts and to share the way that we do our work to create more understanding in practice about research and in research about practice. Both of these areas are so important for us to be able to create more relevant educational research too. We need to understand practice better. And in order to do this, we need to have mindsets that are open to each other, that respect each other. We need to have the skills to communicate, but not least the skills to question, the skills to pose important questions, and to be professionally uncertain, and to see the questioning and the uncertainty as a part of our profession, that this is what we do, this is how we learn, and the capacity to work together and to find out things together. And the same goes for the researcher side. Researchers need to have the mindset, the openness, the respect, the wonder, the curiosity, the questioning attitude to what practice is and what do you need, and how can we help and how can we find out together, and the capacity to do this. And all together, I think developing a common understanding that we're in this together and that we're trying to develop schools that will enhance education for all children, regardless of who they are, where they are, what they are, that we're in this together and that we need to be professionally uncertain together and to find out what we can do in our research practice partnerships and in the communication that we have together in our work ahead. So I hope that these next 2 days will also be a good opportunity for critical communication and for critical understanding of each other's practices and each other's methods, and to realize that there's nothing certain in this world. There are questions about everything, and we need to realize also the limitations of our knowledge and the limitations of both research and practice, but that we do have the possibility to make some enhancement, some improvement, and that I think we're best served if we do it together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for the insightful speech on thoughtful engagement with research, and also for your wonderful introduction to Dr. Ruth Wong's work. Shall we give another round of applause to Professor, please? We will now proceed with the Q&A session. Professor Munthe, please do take a seat. Professor Loh Yi-Ling will be the moderator for this session. Professor Loh is President's Chair Professor in Education and the Dean for Faculty, Academic and Faculty Affairs, NIE. She is also a world-renowned scholar in teacher education and world Englishes. Professor Loh, please.
Thank you very much to Professor Munthe for that very engaging presentation. It's my pleasure to moderate the Q&A, and I think you see the QR code, and it will be beamed into my iPad. And actually, I've received the very first question. So I will spend the next few minutes going through question by question. Though research is absolutely essential, making it palatable to practitioners to observe, absorb, and apply, it seems to be a separate challenge all by itself. What are some of your thoughts and advice for us?
Okay, and us would be a teacher or researcher, or?
I guess those of us interested in the findings of the research, I would say educational stakeholders, broadly speaking, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners.
So yeah, well, that was a difficult question. Research is, as I've tried to say, it's difficult, it's complicated, it's fraught with uncertainties and limitations, and yet it's the way that we investigate It's the way that we do inquiry. It's really a learning method. So it's a way that we learn about what's going on and what we can possibly do. So I think that in that sense, we depend on research totally, because the difference too between research and inquiry is that research, you do have the methodological stringency, the rigorous methods, which makes it a little bit more dependable in that sense, even though we always have to question the results that we get from research no matter what. But a little bit more dependable, and it's always good to know that there's something that you might see as more valid, as more trustworthy, and that you can at least have a foundation to move on ahead. Yeah, I've always been an admirer of John Dewey and his notion of growth. And I think that when it comes to research and knowledge too, we never reach a goal. We're never there. It's always we're always on our way. So doing research is always just one step further because there are new questions and new things that we need to find out.
Thank you very much. And still, in a sense, related tangentially to the first question, how would you define thoughtful engagement with educational research? And is there a way that we can measure it effectively?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if we can measure it in the sense of, well, yes, you can measure it, and it has been done too, in different ways, because thoughtful engagement with research is about an attitude, and you can measure the attitudes towards research. You can measure to find out whether people are open to research or not. But it's also about being critical. It's about the capacity to engage with research in a way that you can read it, you can understand it, you can discuss it, you can find out whether it's relevant for the work that you're doing, for your own situation and your context. In some cases, it can also be about implementing results from research into your own practice, because there's research that can show that, for instance, in reading, that there are ways to learn to read that can be better than others. And implementing new ways of learning how to read can also improve your own, and that's one way of critically engaging with it, because you also make a conscious decision about using it.
So you seem to have a clairvoyance about you, because the next question clearly is from a teacher practitioner who says that researchers tend to be more narrowly focused on esoteric concepts like assessment for learning, inquiry-based learning approaches, etc. But as a teacher practitioner, I would like to say that this is just one of the many things that we do in the classroom. Mm-hmm. How do you suggest that teachers integrate or try to bridge all these good things into practice in our classrooms?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what teacher education is for, too. So, yeah. So, no, that's just it. I mean, there is research on just about everything. You can find research on all topics. So I think that it's really important to find out, well, where is this school now? What are our pressing issues? What are we mainly concerned about, learning about? Because it takes time to learn properly, to learn deeply. So you can't just jump from one thing and read one article and say, okay, I'll do that, and then the next day you read another article and you'll do that. I don't think that's a good way to move ahead. It has to be done in a concerted, cohesive way, and it should, in fact, too, be something that the school is engaged with. So if you see that, okay, here at this school, we might have problems with, okay, say bullying, since that's one of my topics, then it could be an idea to find out about bullying, find out about relationship building, find out about what we can do to strengthen relationships and work on that. And at the same time, to make sure that you also monitor your progress and to see that it is evolving, that it's developing. But yes, I can see the problem. Can I just tell you that once I looked up the question, are there any questions? Because we always ask that at the end of lectures, teachers, right? Are there any questions? Do you have any questions? And there's a research article on that. So that's interesting too. And it was a research article that had asked students, how do you perceive the question, are there any questions? And the reason why teachers don't get answers when they ask that question is that the main understanding is that, well, this is the end of the lecture, this is the end of the lesson, we're closing now, right? So, so it was more a rhetorical question. So, yeah.
So again, this question leads to the next, which is, what do you see to the main barriers to the effective utilization of educational research in schools? And do you have suggestions on how we can mitigate these barriers?
One of the things that I did not mention, because it's support. I mean, I think we need to have the infrastructure and the support in order to do it. And a main support for using research in schools is the principal. So the leadership of the school is really a main factor when it comes to using research, both that the leadership walks the talk, that they show that research is relevant for their work and that they want to use it, but also in order to create time, space, place, the necessary discussions, the collaborative groups. So school leadership is really an important part of creating this. But beyond school leadership, you also have, I'm not quite sure how the schools are organized here. For us, it's at the municipal level. So you would have the municipality and the school leadership at the municipal level, and what they expect of principals and how they also support the use of research. So it's really the whole infrastructure that is necessary in order to get this integrated is the way we work. And I think that's one of the things that comes out of Farley Ripple's work. Farley Ripple's work on using research says that the schools that use research deeply, they say, oh, that's just how we work. It's just a part of our DNA. It's not an additional thing that we do, because that's really very important. That's not something on top of everything else. It's how we do things here.
So linking your keynote to the theme of the conference, perhaps I'd like to ask you a little bit of a crystal balling kind of question. What emerging trends in educational research should educators be attentive to, and how might they affect teaching and learning as well as teacher education?
Okay, the crystal ball. Well, I think what we see coming ahead, as I said, we're missing those final bricks, really, in creating the research practice partnerships cohesively and getting even stronger grips on that. So I think that could be one thing that we'll see developing ahead, and that it can be important, I think, for schools to be aware of and to connect and to be willing to connect with research in that sense. But another thing that we're seeing is when it comes to the topics, inclusion, exclusion has been a hot topic for quite a few years. I think we'll still see that in many years ahead. There might be even greater cause for concern in the years ahead, in fact, too, and maybe even with digitalization, that might be a way to create methods to limit inclusion, exclusion, but with social media, we're seeing quite the opposite. So well-being and inclusion are very hot topics now, and I think too, we need. There's been a lot of talk about the whole child, a holistic education, and what does that really mean? Where are the arts? Where is the creativity? Where is the learning to live and to have a good life? I mean, things like that too, I think we'll be seeing more and more of pressing its way forward too. So yeah, there are lots of things that are important to be aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that the rest of the questions are quite similar in terms of themes. And I am aware that all of us have been here for the last 90 minutes. So I think it leaves me now the great pleasure of thanking Professor Elaine Munthe for a very wonderful delivery of the 4th Dr. Ruth Wong Professorship in Teacher Education lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank
Professor
you.
Munthe.
Thank you.
Thank you, for professors, for the candid and engaging session. Next, I would now like to invite Professor Christine Goh, NIE Director, to present a token of appreciation to Professor Elaine Munthe, please. Director, please. The token of appreciation is a 24K yellow gold orchid brooch. Thank you, professors. Please return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the keynote session. There is a tea reception outside the auditorium. The parallel sessions will start at 3:30 p.m. Kindly follow the signs outside the auditorium to the venues. Changes to the sessions, if any, can be found on the RPIC 2024 website. Thank you very much for being with us today. We wish you all a very pleasant and fruitful conference.